Welcome everyone! Today I'm going to be talking about the Gothic as a genre. I dress for the occasion, I have a mad wife locked in the attic, and here's my bottle of Amontillado. If you understood those references, this video is for you. And if you didn't, you will have to stay and watch to find out what I was talking about. I wanted to create a series about Gothic fiction where I'm going to talk about short stories, poems, and novels. So I decided to create this video because I'm going to discuss those works according to the conventions of the Gothic. So without further ado, let's begin. The Gothic sprung from the Romantic movement, but it challenged the ideas of the Enlightenment in a very different way. Whereas the Romantics put emphasis on emotion over reason, the Gothic took matters to an extreme by giving voice to irrational, horrific, and transgressive thoughts, desires, and impulses, thereby conjuring an unwritten world of violence, sex, terror, and death. The first Gothic story ever written was The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole in 1764. Walpole was inspired by Gothic architecture, and he liked the style so much that he even built a villa in this style. The building, better known as Strawberry Hills, still stands, and it is located in London. It was transformed into a museum and it is open to the public. Following Walpole's steps, Anne Radcliffe published The Castles of Athling and Dubnane in 1789. And although this novel was not successful, the ones that followed became popular. One that received special acclaim was The Mysteries of Udolpho. Then, in 1796, Matthew Gregory Lewis joined the trend with his novel The Monk. These three authors built the foundations for the genre we know today as the Gothic. Alan Lloyd Smith explains that the Gothic is about the return of the past, of the repressed and denied, the buried secret that subverts and corrodes the present. Whatever the culture does not want to know or admit, will not or dare not tell itself. With its romantic views, the Gothic draws its imagery from fairy tales. The characters tend to be very archetypal: damsels in distress, chivalrous heroes, and outcasts. Fantastic elements, although subtle, pervade Gothic stories. Nature is also threatening and symbolic. But the most important element that the Gothic takes from the fairy tales is the setting: the woods, the castle, and the tower. The woods represent the unknown. It is a natural barrier that keeps the character away from the outside world. It is a place of dangerous encounters of all sorts. The castle is a place of mystery, ruin, and decay. As the Gothic evolved, the castle turned into the hall, the manor, and the abbey. It is any grand house highly linked to the character's past and the owner's legacy. It is usually a representation of the character's moral ruin and misfortunes. The tower is a place of imprisonment, secrets, and devastating knowledge. Just like the castle, the tower has evolved. It has been replaced by the attic and the cellar. One of the most important elements of the Gothic is the Sublime. Edmund Burke defines the Sublime as the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. According to Burke, whatever is fitted in any sort to excite the ideas of pain and danger, whatever is in any sort terrible, or is conversant about terrible objects, or operates in a manner analogous to terror, is a source of the Sublime. That is to say that the Sublime is connected to the next most important element of the Gothic, which is terror. Gothic stories aim to evoke terror instead of horror. Horror is provoked by fear of what is known. Horror scenes can be seen and described. For instance, violence and gore provokes horror. Terror, on the other hand, is the fear of the unknown. We cannot see the threat, yet we know it is there, watching us. The fear that horror incites in us makes us want to flee, whereas the fear that terror incites makes us want to get closer and discover its depths. Burke explains that in nature, dark, confused, uncertain images have a greater power on the fancy to form the greater passions than those have which are more clear and determinate. Terror makes us tremble, yet it arouses our curiosity in a way that prevents us from fleeing. It pulls us to the unknown, no matter how terrifying it seems. This attraction is connected to the uncanny. Freud describes this concept as that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. According to some of the proponents of this theory, such as Heidegger, we feel both repulsed and attracted by the object of terror. We are afraid of it because a piece of it reminds us of something within ourselves, something we might not recognize as part of our being. Deborah Lutz explains the uncanny as the way we think the most familiar, the everyday world around us, full of society, people, and chatter, constitutes our true being. But our authentic self is only to be found on the edge of the abyss, at the limit of darkness, of the dizzy rapture of the unknowable. Ghosts and monsters are often used to reveal the cruel nature of humanity. They serve as foil characters to living counterparts. The Gothic tells us that we should fear the living, not the dead. The dead cannot hurt you, but the living can, because men and women can be real monsters. Gothic stories are usually concerned with the past and how one can be haunted by the past. So the supernatural is usually employed to convey this theme. A ghost can certainly appear to haunt a character for their past deeds, but there are other ways in which the Gothic addresses this idea, such as family curses, prophecies, nightmares, dreams, and visions. In more refined Gothic works, paranormal events end up having a rational explanation. They distract the characters from the more serious issue at hand, which usually revolves around generational trauma, incest, a murder committed in the past, and an old secret that is about to come to light. The characters of these stories are prone to murder, incest, and madness. In many Gothic stories, the paranormal turns out to be a product of the character's imagination because the authors try to make a point that minds, not castles, are haunted. In Gothic romance, the supernatural elements tends to be more subtle. It might be a product of the character's overactive imagination, or it might be spiritual. Such is the case in Jane Eyre, where the supernatural manifests in the ghost-like apparition of a woman, which ends up being Mrs. Rochester. Nonetheless, throughout the story, the supernatural also manifests in dreams that foreshadow the obstacles Jane will have to face. The supernatural may also be represented by the love between the protagonists. Jane and Rochester claim to have heard each other from great miles away. Similarly, in Wuthering Heights, the love of Catherine and Heathcliff is said to transcend the boundaries of time, distance, and ultimately of life and death. Those who have read Jane Eyre know what The Woman in the Attic is about. Nonetheless, I believe that the woman in the attic is not strictly limited to a trope. Yes, she is Rochester's mad wife and Bluebeard's dead brides, but as Gothic fiction evolved, this notion evolved as well. Nowadays, the terrible secrets of the characters are the women in the attic. In other words, the women in the attic are the secrets the characters seek to avoid or discover. There are different types of Gothic fiction. Gothic horror is considered a subgenre of horror because it borrows from the conventions of horror. Its aim is still to evoke terror, but it includes gore and violence. There is Gothic horror with paranormal elements, without paranormal elements, and in which the paranormal has a rational explanation. We can also distinguish two types of Gothic romance. The first centers on adventure, and it puts emphasis on the heroine's journey. It was first popularized with Anne Radcliffe's novels. In these stories, the protagonist escapes from a threat, often embodied by a male villain, to end up in a journey packed with action. She gets lost in the forest, is attacked by highwaymen, and is finally rescued by a brave hero. These types of story were usually written for women. These novels offered an escape from their highly sheltered lives. Not many of them are known nowadays because, as it usually happens with things that women love, they were considered lesser works of fiction. The other type of Gothic romance puts emphasis on the love story. Here the male protagonist and the villain merge in the figure of the Byronic hero. The threat is usually a psychological one. It comes from the character's feelings, past, and secrets. This type of Gothic romance often deals with themes of isolation, confinement, madness, guilt, regret, and sexual awakening. The mysterious past of the Byronic hero is what incites both terror and attraction in the protagonist. What draws her to him is the feeling of the uncanny. The female protagonist might also be afraid of her desires. Gothic love stories also challenge our perspectives on power dynamics. In many of them, the male protagonist possesses all the means to control the female protagonist. The male lead is usually strong, wealthy, educated, and cunning. The female protagonist, on the other hand, tends to be vulnerable, naive, destitute, or from a lower social status. Nonetheless, she is usually the one who overpowers the male protagonist, who is rendered weak by her charms. A modern example of the Gothic romance in which both categories overlap is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. The Southern Gothic centers on the life of the American South. It emerged with the works of Edgar Allan Poe, who is considered the first Southern Gothic writer. Nonetheless, the features of the Southern Gothic as we know it today were only defined after the American Civil War. The death and destruction that desolated America in the 19th century is at the heart of the Southern Gothic, showing country life as oppressive and brutal. It subverts our notions of the American dream. The characters are usually outcasts, and the stories revolve around the themes of alienation, oppression, the clash between the old and new South, and the grotesque. I haven't read lots of Southern Gothic fiction, but I'm currently reading Absalom by William Faulkner, and I'm loving this so much. It's a very challenging novel, but completely worthy of my time. I will make a video about this in a couple of weeks. Now, some last words to conclude this video. Many people think Gothic fiction is no longer popular, but I don't think that's the case. I believe that the reason why we don't see more Gothic novels in the bookstores is because they are sold under a different genre, usually horror. There is this misconception that prevails in the publishing industry where the Gothic is seen as a subgenre of horror. But as you have seen, the Gothic is its own thing with its own conventions. Gothic stories are not meant to scare as horror does. They are meant to be atmospheric and suspenseful. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoy creating this video, so let me know in the comments if you like it. I'll see you soon. Bye!